So why a convocation or why a symposium on rethinking technology, or specifically digital technology? 20 years ago, technology meant a PC at work, a car radio, and a television at home. But now it's at the center of our lives, and our lives are increasingly dependent on it. In fact, if the internet went down now, it's likely society would seize up, at least for a while. And that doesn't mean just losing contact with our Facebook friends, but with our ATM, our filling station, our supermarket, and all the other things we need to get through the day. We're now totally immersed in a digital ecosystem. It's come on so fast and seems so attractive. We didn't appreciate the full ramifications until about 2 years ago. It wasn't until the Snowden revelations, the Sony hack, the reality of ID theft, and the evident threat to so many jobs, both skilled and unskilled, that it's beginning to be time to reconsider the digital revolution and open it up to the public discussion. So to that end, this afternoon we've assembled a group of individual contributors who are technologists, writers, and other Silicon Valley insiders from different backgrounds to consider the effect of the revolution as they have seen it from their own perspective.
And there's
after each panelist,
a well-known, very successful entrepreneur in Silicon Valley whose name I won't name, but he was quoted as saying that internet companies do best when they're founded on one of the 7 deadly sins, right? And it makes a lot of sense, right? If we're hardwired for lust, greed, and sloth, then if you build technologies that enable those, they'll be instantly adoptable. They'll grow very quickly. They'll grow exponentially to give us the kind of...
The media business model is broken. Advertising doesn't pay. Paywalls don't pay. And so what's going to replace that? That's the question that we need to answer, because we need reliable sources of media. If all our media is paid for by somebody, special interest groups are going to have a field day. We've got important issues to figure out. We've got important decisions to make about energy, the environment, the economy, education, elder health care. And those are just the things that begin with the letter E.
I think when you look at things that way, it's not surprising that you've got companies where lots and lots of very smart, very talented people go to work every day and they try to design software that, as one person from the industry said, the brightest young minds of our generation are designing software that encourages people to click ads, and so this is,
I don't know if we look at the history of kind of what we've done in Silicon Valley, I think we're really good at solving problems that 20-year-olds with extra cash have, right? Like, geez, I want a pizza and I'm at the middle of this outdoor gathering. Can it be delivered by a drone? Because that'd be super cool. And to solve that problem, a company like Amazon can go and figure out how to modify the FAA rules around where drones are allowed to fly. But right here in Silicon Valley and across California, we have this problem of our reservoirs being at 5% strength. And I'll
give you a couple of examples of some of the things our customers go through. The change in the telephone structure, which has gone from an analog system to a VoIP system. There are many products that used to communicate perfectly fine via telephone. All of a sudden, the typical telephone analog system has gone away, and now you have to communicate over the internet, VoIP-type services, which are offered by Comcast, Vonage, Magic Jack. These are much less reliable. Everything has to be reconfigured. Products weren't necessarily designed for the advent of VoIP communication.
It's just humbling
so
to
you take
envision. And so I've had many of those experiences of watching the power of science and the impact of technological development and the good of that technological development. And so I'm actually going to be arguing something very different today, which is technology is good. my body of work.
Is it possible that the question of meaning is grounded in something that's actually real, or is it just an illusion, and that the scientific, the greatest scientific minds have told us, some of them, that we don't need any meaningful explanations, we don't need any ideas of purpose, certainly not intelligent design. That is completely forbidden to think about, because it has been formulated in very simple-minded ways.
I think that the question before us is, how do we really design for generosity? How do we design for the positive side of our hard wiring? And I think that's an experiment that service-based has been engaged in since the dawn of the first tech boom, right? And it's this idea that if we are wired for generosity, and you create systems that not only expect that, but count on that, what happens? And I think what you see, and what we've seen through service space, is that what happens is that you actually make a shift from consumption to contribution, and from isolation to community, from transaction to trust, and from scarcity to abundance. And when I think about not just the outcomes, but the process that's involved in each of those sort of four shifts, I really feel like that's the kind of world that I want to live in. And so my open question from, inside the tech community and to the tech community is, how do we design and develop technologies that are catered towards the positive and socially beneficial side of our hardwiring? How do we make the choice to amplify our innate goodness with technology instead of catering to the lowest common denominator?
Things. I actually have experienced the ramifications of the digital revolution and the technological revolution by sitting in the audiences, listening to scientists talk about what seems to be almost magical in its power. I remember watching a film of a scientist in California who was showing small animals who were not able to walk because of multiple sclerosis being administered medication that had nanoparticles in them, and watching them walk 2 months later. And if you think about the ramifications of one small application for the greater good of society, it's just humbling to envision. And so I've had many, many of those experiences of watching the power of science and the impact of technological development and the good of that technological development.
What I really like to think about is,
and so
technology is a kind of public infrastructure. It's something that allows all of us to do the things that we want to do, as Nina said, more efficiently and with potentially greater impact. So if we think about this, technology as a public good or as public infrastructure, I think it's a real problem right now when we see that the technology that most of us use on a day-to-day basis is created by corporations, corporations with a specific set of goals and interests that are driven essentially by our financial system and the kinds of things that our financial system is designed to enable.
If you'll remember, at the Buddhist Monastery. And you said that you see a lot of idealism in the students, but once they get hired in some of the big prestigious companies, that you could almost watch month by month as their idealism tends to peter out and they become part of the corporate culture that we're talking about. So how could you nurture that in your students at the undergrad and graduate level to keep that fire burning as they go into the corporate world?
The reason I teach entrepreneurship is not to have students start successful companies and make a lot of money. I teach entrepreneurship because I see that as a safe space for the exploration of student-driven visions that can be explored in that kind of a creative and collaborative and safe way within the confines of the university. And so
I'm not sure universities are very good at teaching entrepreneurism, because the students leave with huge debts, which puts them in a very bad position to be an entrepreneur. And really, entrepreneurism is best learned on the job with great mentors. And that's one of the reasons they have to do these corporate jobs. They don't have, when we grew up, our generation, Education was largely free, and it was fantastic, and we could just study whatever we wanted to. We could be free spirits after we left. The millennials don't have that option, and and they're facing a world where they have to get on the bus to get taken over to Google, Facebook, wherever they work. When was it cool to be a company man or a company woman, eating at the company store, being paid in company chit, right, options and so on? That was never cool. And San Francisco's got a great tradition of breaking down those barriers. Those people in those buses aren't anybody's enemy. They're told to get on the bus, yet they're not known in their neighborhoods. They're segregated from their neighborhoods. The police sweep the homeless away from Twitter down on Market Street. And let's get those people off the bus. What happened to telecommuting? Okay, Google's got fantastic telecommuting tools. Let's use the tools in a way that will benefit our community, not segregate it. And that's the only way you can gentrify areas like the Tenderloin and so on, where Twitter is not by competing with local services. I mean, they offer free food, free apartment cleaning, free dentist appointments, free haircuts. It's like living at home with mum, but there's no mum. It's brilliant.
Thank you all very much for coming and for presenting your own personal points of view. So now let's open the discussion. And if you suddenly found yourself the CEO of Facebook or Google or some other company yet to be named, how would you reconfigure your very popular, very globally used platform to carry out the ideals that you'd like to see used?
If I could do something with Facebook and Google, I would change the way they charge for advertising and so on, because that is really taking so much revenue out of the advertising business that would have gone to media companies, which supports journalists and supports a professional media class that is essential to keeping our government honest, keeping our businessmen honest.
And so if I were a CEO that would be remaking my product, I would be recognizing the fact that we are awakening to a new understanding of what it means to be an engaged human. And so doing what I could do to foster meaningful relationships with others, developing communities within a localized neighborhood level and a more fractionated, issues-oriented engagement with people outside of proximity to myself, and helping me realize that there's more than simply buying things that will lead to a good life.
Conversation. Henry BAER. Henry is the executive director of AHIMSA, the sponsor of this afternoon. Henry was for many years a dentist and probably knows more ways than the marathon man does, torture. But he'll be in a Pacific role now.
Well, first of all, I want to thank everybody here for spending a beautiful Sunday. Our panel, appreciate coming up here, and the audience. This event is sponsored by AHIMSA and the Interfaith Center. AHIMSA, as Tom mentioned a few minutes ago, we have been in existence now since 1993, looking at nonviolence, which is what AHIMSA stands for, trying to solve nonviolence from a scientific, from a religious, and from a social action perspective. So I really appreciate you all coming today. I think it's been a very interesting topic. AHIMSA has these various events. Everything is free. We never charge anything for attendance and for people coming to our events. Donation box. Once again, thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Henry. In addition, there's also a sign-up sheet if you'd like to be informed of future AHIMSA events. Just add your email if you would, please. So again, anybody from the audience want to bring up some issues, either build on what's been talked about here, or, sir?
Yes, the digital revolution was to bring about a greater sense of equality, I'd heard, because more people have access to the internet and so on. That hasn't happened. What I've seen a lot of basically young white males who've really done quite well with the internet, but I haven't experienced the same thing with women or with communities of color. So my point is, where do we go with that? And if we go back to your first question, if you were head of CEO of Facebook or Google or whatever, what would you do in order to try to include communities of color and women more seriously in the digital revolution, to empower those communities?
So our approach to this at Berkeley and in my research group has been to create alternative entry points for people who want to get into computer science and education that really allows them to engage in a safe way, in a supportive way, and on their own terms. So that means maybe even to a certain extent redefining what it means to be a computer scientist. So when we think about computer science, we only think about expectation of what excellence means in computer science. Well, no, if you look at these companies, lots of other kinds of people work there also. They have designers, they have people who work in user research, they have people who take on strategic roles in the company, there are people who work on the math and the science behind it. So that's not only one way for someone to engage with computer science, there's many different ways that speak to someone's prior interests and skills and aptitude in ways that are broader than just having grown up with a computer since you were 8 years old.
It just occurred to me that one thing that could help is to find the stories, the exceptions, the stories of people of color who have found their way in, and especially the most inspiring kind of stories, and help spread those stories somehow in the media, and also to help spread the stories of the educational, the teachers. I've met a few people and interviewed them. One woman who worked in very poor school districts and did incredible things. Anyway, there's a lot that could be done by sharing stories.
Go there. And that is, you talked about capitalism and its problems. And I wonder if this can ever be changed in terms of the equity with this current system of runaway capitalism. I don't think so. And the other thing, if that isn't changed, the structure isn't changed, then how do we require Google and other folks at least to perhaps make a significant contribution to those communities of color so that they can help with the divide as we evolve? We cannot evolve as a nation to where we need to go unless individuals, even the least of these, evolve in terms of their potential. So those are the kinds of things I'm working on. How do we create another kind of story, a narrative, where all people are seen as being absolutely essential to the future of the universe, and how can the digital revolution add to that or support that?
Difficulties that our children have in terms of access and disparities. Probably the most difficult meeting I ever chaired was listening to a report from the local children's hospital, which had talked about the delay in their delivering their report to us because they were, and I may become emotional in this moment, it's a very painful thing to share, that they had difficulty delivering and framing the idea in their report and in their presentation, that despite all of the services that they were providing to the many thousands of children each year, they didn't understand how they were going to tell these kids that no matter what they did in their lives, that there would really be no significant change, because the primary determinant in their lives was their socioeconomic status of their parents, and that no amount of input would change those dynamics significantly. And as a grant maker, that is devastating to hear. And if we each we all share responsibilities as members of communities to try to understand how to bring about better good for our families, our neighborhoods, and our communities at large. And if we understood the impact of this on ourselves, that we don't all have equal access, hopefully people would be able to change. It's devastating.
Yeah, I agree, that was well put. It's not access to technology that really determines your well-being. It's really, you can look up lectures at Stanford University for free, for example, You can teach yourself lots of things, but if you don't have access to the opportunities, the reason to go to university, it's education, but you become part of a clique, you become part of an alumni organization, and that looks out for you for the rest of your life. If you don't have those connections, it doesn't matter how much technology you have.
That is, just one other comment is, especially if you're from AHIMSA, which also has to do with no harm, no violence against people. And what I'm saying is, I think the present situation, a lot of harm is being done, and a lot of violence is being done to people who don't have access. And I just want to put that out there, because to me that's a very, very serious issue. It's not just this poor little kid doesn't have access. It's doing violence to their families and to their future, and then to the future of the nation because of that. So,
how was the violence expressed?
In very insidious ways. It's not like it was in Selma, since you've all seen the film Selma. It has to do with self-esteem, a sense of nobodiness, as you're saying, no future. That is why we have such violence in communities of color. There are no options for them. They don't see options, so why not take your chance in selling drugs or doing this kind of thing? There's no sense of possibilities like I even had growing up in a very segregated environment. But still, there was this hope that somehow through education or whatever, you could also be part of the progress. And then your life would help change it for those coming after you. The whole concept in some of the native communities of 7 generations, you do things that will have impact for 7 generations. So that's what I mean by the violence. It is not physical. It is psychological or psychic. It's emotional. And those things are just as important as physical violence. In fact, I think they're more important at times.
We have a tendency to continue to look to government or Google or Facebook, a big tech company to solve this problem. And I would suggest that the solution wouldn't be found there. That the place that we're going to find that solution is from just everyday acts of goodness amongst all of us. The community who is witnessing question of how do we design systems that bring out our inherent goodness, because it'll come in these, I sense that it'll be these small incremental 1% shifts that all of us can make that will have an emergence that's a totally new game.
I think it comes from abundance. If everybody's taken care of in a safe place, safe water, safe everything, it's easy to be generous with your time and your efforts. If you don't have that, you can't do that. Even a 1% thing.
Is on my homepage, if I was Google, it would be, what are you doing with your time? Why are you here? What's important to you? What's important to your family? How can you improve anything? Or questions like that cause people to think, which we don't think about enough. We go off on our daily, geez, I have this to-do list. I got to get all this stuff done, and it never really has a context, a meaning of, what's going to come from what I've done. The more we acknowledge the fact that we got to not be about fame and fortune, the better off we will be.
I appreciate what you said, and it reminds me of what you said, and sometimes I remark to someone I might be interviewing that there's no career path to finding my real life, and what you were describing sounded like something in that direction, and the questions that you were posing are in that direction. So I don't know if there will ever be a 101 finding your real life course, but it wouldn't be a bad idea.
There's been a dramatic shift around the globe of governments really focusing on how to develop the whole person. Indices of well-being, the OECD has created a well-being index. The UN has now developed the first happiness report, which seeks to better understand how we develop humanity towards a greater sense of happiness and meaning, rather than simply reductive economic indicators of productivity, which is beautiful to watch. And then finally,
I'd like to make a comment on, I spent, since I saw half a lifetime ago the disconnect between technical capability and ethical responsibility, and have tried to figure out how that came to be and where we could go from here, I've tried to find a way that we could harmonize the two. And the best example that I can think of is that all technology is based on leverage, trying to maximize outputs while at the same time minimizing inputs. And all the world's ethical systems are based on be composed within yourself, and within that composed frame of mind, practice compassion with others. In John's account of the Last Supper in John's Gospel, it's the two foundations of the teachings of Jesus of Nazareth were peace be with you, be composed, and love one another. Manifest that composure in acts of kindness. And I think in that sense, technology and spirituality harmonize with each other if whenever we pick up any tool, that we combat it with a composed frame of mind and intend that the outcome of that leveraging capability will be to manifest kindness. And that could be summarized in a bumper sticker as be composed, be kind. And that may be one way of coming at our tools for ourselves, where we can leverage things out with unintended consequences that can ripple far and wide.
Hi, my name is Muriel. I'm an interfaith minister in the Bay Area, and I also work at City College of San Francisco, and I work with students with disabilities. So I want to begin by saying technology has been magical in the lives of people with disabilities, from JAWS to Zoom text to Kurzweil. So I am certainly not anti-technology, but we started this discussion with reflecting on the phrase, people matter. And I want to go back to that and say maybe in our self-reflection, maybe in our mindfulness, we might say, turn the iPhone off. Turn the computer off. You know, because as I reflect as the days go on, and I don't know if I have 8,000 days left or 9,000 days left or next week, how many hours do I want to spend staring at the box? And I'm about paying attention to the other human beings. And I don't know about you, I get really upset when I'm in a restaurant and I see people staring at their iPhones when they should be sharing a meal with that person who says, I care about you enough to sit here with you and share a meal. So you should be paying attention and not be staring at an iPhone or saying, oh, I have to check my email 12 times a day. So, you know, and now when I think about them building robots to be attendants to elderly people, I just kind of go, what's happening? Are we forgetting to connect? Are we forgetting to look into each other's eyes and go, people do matter, and technology is a tool, and let's take the technology sort of off this high, you know, altar we've put it on and put people first. And not get rid of the technology, but just kind of put it in perspective. You know? Okay, thanks.
Talking about digital technology in particular, I think over the years, the communications affordances of digital technologies have really taken over our lives in a certain way. And I think there's a certain kind of belief, or maybe a hope, or maybe, you know, kind of a feedback that communications will solve all problems. You know, I think we keep talking and talking about things until, you know, we're blue in the face, as it were, on the internet or elsewhere, with the idea that that talking somehow solves the problem or gets us closer to a solution or something like that. And I think we have to kind of realize that you know, communications may not solve all problems. I mean, I'm appreciative of your point as well. You know, I think, you know, a lot of things aren't, you know, it's not about endless communications and kind of just talking and conversation. It's about you know, really you know, reflection on ourselves and focusing on what matters to us and to the people that are close to us, and then getting to work, you know, really focusing and creating time and space to work on those things within us or in the world. And that doesn't require you know, a Slack account or, you know, my IM window open to be doing those things at that time, right? It really requires focus and discipline and getting to it. And, you know, technology can be an enabler of that, but it can also be a distraction from that. And so I think we have to be cognizant of the limitations of, you know, online all the time communications and how far talking can get us. So you know, maybe that's a good note to end on.
Anybody want to add a coda? All right. Well, thank you all very much. And thank you all for your time and for coming down and your insights and getting this conversation will be going on throughout the rest of our lives and our children's lives.